well, if we leave, there's going to be chaos. I don't believe that. 78% of the Iraqis say that's not going to happen. 78% of the Iraqis say we're the ones that are causing this, and Al-Qaeda is going to disappear. The United States should not be lowering its standards to the standards of terrorists, and I think that's a very important point. This is a hearts and minds of the people. That's why I say it's important to get them out of the green zone, get them out of Saddam's palace. They're in Saddam's palace. What does that signify?
Well, it will come as news to American forces that they're living in Saddam's palace. The Green Zone is occupied by a number of things, including the Iraqi government much of the time, but that's Jack Murtha, and he has become perhaps the leading Democrat in the House of Representatives on the issue of Iraq and troop withdrawal. He is Nancy Pelosi's close confidant on the issue. And she boomed him, you may recall, for majority leader. That failed. He lost to Steny Hoyer, but he remains a very important public spokesman, widely admired. He is, of course, himself a veteran with a long history of involvement in military affairs. Back with our panel on this. Now, you also heard him say that 78% of the Iraqis think that we're the ones who are causing the violence. Do you know what that number comes from? I don't remember seeing that anywhere.
I don't know that one. There was an earlier poll I used to cite where it said that something like that number of that percentage of Iraqis wanted Americans out of Iraq, but it didn't say when. And then the ABC did a more extensive poll.
100% of Americans want Americans out of Iraq, too.
No, ABC did a more extensive poll with a bigger sample and found out only 29% of Iraqis wanted Americans out now. So I think there's a big distinction there. But look, this is a guy that says a lot of wacky things. It's amazing.
Al-Qaeda is going to disappear, he said.
Well, I know. There were stories just in the New York Times and Washington Post and other papers saying that just this week, that citing intelligence sources saying Al-Qaeda has regrouped effectively, and that Osama bin Laden may even be back in firm control of Al-Qaeda. So I don't know how he says it, but he said these things that, we can redeploy American troops nearby in Okinawa, which is 5,000 miles away. He said we should bulldoze Abu Ghraib prison, which the U.S. I don't think it has any prisoners anymore. The whole thing was turned over to the Iraqis a year and a half ago. He said that, the Haditha killings, where these Marines, one of them was killed, and then they killed a bunch of Iraqis. He said that it was in cold-blooded murder, and he knew that because the Marine Commandant had told him that. Well, it turned out he didn't talk to the Marine Commandant until a week later, after he made that statement, and on and on and on. And he's a strange guy. You can see already some Democrats that are having qualms about following this guy on Iraq. I think one of those is Steny Hoyer, who said, well, he'll have to look at the legislation first before he makes a statement.
His latest plan. His
latest plan is to basically, instead of just simply defunding the war, which he could do, which Democrats could do if they wanted to, they could try, he's going to set a set of standards and conditions on deployment. So in other words, troops couldn't go unless they met a certain level of readiness, a certain level of training, certain equipment requirements, which in effect would make it almost impossible to send troops over there. So it's a kind of slow walking of the surge. Now, it's been described as a slow bleed strategy, not necessarily by Murtha himself, but that's something that I think helped motivate Republicans to vote against the non-binding resolution when they read about that. But look, I think that Jack Murtha served the Democrats very well at a certain point in this debate. Because of his military credentials, they kind of used him as a cover or front man to make the argument that the war was wrong, and in so doing, they got in sync with a majority of American opinion, and they rode to victory in the House. Now I think what he's doing is not necessarily representing the majority of American opinion or even the majority of Democratic opinion.
He's saying Al-Qaeda is going to disappear. No one believes that.
I'm talking about his plan for...
Well, but when you make statements like that, you don't have a lot of credibility. The other thing is his plan to put these restrictions on troop deployments and so forth is essentially micromanaging the war and is a constitutional power grab. That is up to the commander-in-chief. The Congress has the power of the purse. They can cut off funding, or they can fund it, or they can partially fund it. But they cannot micromanage the war. The actual execution and prosecution of the war is up to the commander-in-chief. We hear all this talk about Bush, grabbing power from the legislative branch. Well, this is the legislative branch trying to grab the legitimate constitutional power from the executive branch.
It's one of these things that's just too cute. His proposal to, I'm going to have these limitations on the troops. It's actually putting conditions on funding the troops, but it's designed to stop additional troops going in and then forcing them to be drawn down while ostensibly, putting these training requirements on troops. I think it's not going to pass.
Okay, Fred, thank you very much. That's it for the panel. Stay tuned to see why getting on TV is not always a good thing, even for a